Hi, welcome back. This is the first set of slides on HTML and Web Fundamentals. We're going to talk a bit about how the web works, the development process, and also some professional workflow habits, as well as getting to know some basic HTML elements. First, let's talk about how the web works. We're going to go over requests and responses, rendering in your browser, the differences between local versus remote, and front-end and back-end development. So first let's take a look at a typical request and response cycle that happens when you're at home and you want to request a website from a remote server. So you're located right here and you're on your computer and you'd like to access this web page, so you type into your browser www.howstuffworks.com and hit return. And your computer is connected to the internet via some type of cable modem, and that's connected to the rest of the internet at large through your ISP or your internet service provider. And the very first computer that your computer talks to is your ISP's DNS, which is represented here. So this guy is a DNS server, which stands for a domain name server. So domain name servers are kind of like the operators of the internet. They don't actually hold any web page files on them, but they do associate the domain name you typed in, www.howstuffworks.com, with a particular IP address, which is the address location on the internet of that particular web page that you're looking for. So all of the computers on the internet each have an IP address. An IP address is kind of like in the same way that you have an address at your house so that you can get mail and the mailman knows to deliver mail to your address versus someone else's. So computers also have this address to keep track of where they are on the internet. So you ask the first DNS server, so you say, hey, I'm trying to get to www.howstuffworks.com, and this first DNS server actually doesn't know. It doesn't have that written down, so it's going to go off and ask this other DNS server. And this other DNS server says, oh yeah, sure, I know that information. That's actually the IP address 70.42.251.42. And then it sends that information back to the first DNS server that you've connected to. And that DNS server says, great, thanks buddy. I'm going to cache that information. I'll hold on to it in case someone else asks me again in the near future. And then it sends that information back to you. So now you have the actual IP address or the address location of the hosting server that you're trying to connect to. So then your computer goes out and connects to the host, which is represented back here by these two blue towers. And the hosting server has a hard drive with all of the basic files of the website that you're trying to access. So your computer makes a request to that hosting server, and it sends back a response in the form of the web pages that you're asking for. So this conversation back and forth between your browser and this remote server is this request and response cycle. So you make a request in the form of some HTTP headers, and we'll actually take a look at these in a moment, and the server will send back a response, and that's in the form of some HTTP response headers, and also some content, which is in the form of some HTML, some CSS, or some JavaScript files. So let's actually go and take a look at the request and response headers. I'm going to go ahead and bring up the browser. So on Mac, you could use the shortcut Command-Option-I, which stands for Inspector, or you can also go to the View drop-down menu, and you can go to Developer and Developer Tools like that. And here in the developer tools, we see a window that has some code. This is the HTML code that represents this page. But the tab that we're going to look at first is this one here that's called Network. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the Network tab. Okay, and the Network tab is going to reveal to us all of the requests and responses between our browser and the remote server. So I'm going to go ahead and click the reload icon here in the upper left hand corner to reload the page, and then we're going to see in real time all of those requests and responses coming back. And you can see it's even showing a timeline over here on the right of the time it takes to get all of these resources back. And I'm just going to scroll to the top, and I'm going to click on this first one, which is the actual pre-work HTML page. So this is the first request we sent out. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And then I'm going to click this tab here that says headers to view the headers. Okay, so the first one we're going to look at is the request header. And we'll go ahead and zoom in, and we can see some of the information that's included in a request. So here we have the host, which is sites.google.com. We have the method, which is a get method. And then we see the path, which is the location on the server of the HTML page or the file that we're looking for. And then down here we can even see the user agent. We can see here is Chrome browser is the particular browser that we're making the request with. Okay, and then after we sent out the request, we got back this response, which was in the form of this response header and also the content body it sent. So first we'll look at the response header. And here you can see that we got back a status of 200 OK. So the way that the server communicates back is it gives back a status code, and there's different numbers represent different things to the servers. A status code of 404, for example, means that a resource is not found. It's a type of error message that suggests that the content doesn't exist in the location that you were looking for it. Now in our case, we got back a positive or a successful response of 200, which means everything's okay, and I'm sending back the information you wanted. So here on this tab that says response, this is the actual body, the content body of that response. And you can see here that this is actually just in the form of HTML code. So in this class, we're going to learn to write this content here, the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that's passed back to our browser from this remote server. So let's talk about local and remote. So your local computer refers to the one that's right in front of you now. And when you're working on a website, when you're in development, you're going to be making many changes, and you don't want the whole world to see these changes. You want to get everything right before you decide to publish it to the remote server. And the remote server is referring to the computer that's somewhere else in the world. It's somewhere else out on the internet. And the nice thing about this is that other people in the world can access the files off of the remote server, but they cannot access the files off of your local computer. So that gives you a clean, safe space to build the website and to test it in your local browser before publishing it to the remote server. So let's talk a little bit about front-end development versus back-end development. So you may hear people refer to these terms front-end or client-side versus back-end or server-side. So the markup languages HTML and CSS and the programming language JavaScript can all be run client-side, meaning that those are being interpreted by your browser, versus back-end languages, which are interpreted on the server, such as Ruby, Python, PHP, or Java, among others. Now these back-end languages, they might be communicating with a database. And what happens is a request comes in from your browser, and the server is going to use the backend languages to interact with the database in order to generate some HTML, CSS, or JavaScript that's then passed to be interpreted by the browser client side.